Welcome to the Real Free News audio podcast. Today, an examination of Tikkun Olam, repairing the world. Its traditional Jewish roots, its modern transformation into a social justice imperative, and its role in shaping immigration advocacy by Jewish organizations. Tikkun Olam, literally translated as repair of the world, represents a foundational concept in Jewish thought that has evolved dramatically over centuries. In its classical form, rooted in medieval liturgy and 16th century Kabbalistic teachings of Isaac Luria, Tikkun Olam described a mystical process of restoring divine sparks scattered during creation's primordial shattering. This spiritual repair was achieved through strict observance of the mitzvot, emphasizing personal piety and communal redemption rather than worldly activism. For traditional Jews, it remained an eschatological ideal, tied to messianic expectations and the ultimate perfection of existence under divine rule. In the 20th century, however, Reform and Conservative Judaism repurposed Tikkun Olam as a mandate for social justice and political engagement, transforming it into a rallying cry for progressive causes. This shift accelerated in post-war America, aligned with broader efforts to universalize Jewish ethics, positioning Tikkun Olam as a call to combat inequality, poverty, and oppression globally. Organizations like the American Jewish Committee, AJC, and Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, HIS, embraced it to justify advocacy for refugees and migrants, framing open borders as a sacred duty. Yet, this modern interpretation carries double meanings, serving not only humanitarian goals, but also strategic aims to promote diversity as a safeguard against historical persecutions. The term's application to immigration activism reveals its subversive potential. While publicly presented as altruistic repair, Tikkun Olam often masks additional motivations rooted in Jewish survival strategies. Homogeneous societies have historically persecuted minorities, so fostering multiculturalism dilutes potential threats, aligning with theories of ethnic self-preservation. This article explores Tikkun Olam's origins, its weaponization in policy battles, and how it justifies a dual agenda: overt aid intertwined with demographic engineering to erode majority dominance in Western nations. The evolution and subversive layers of Tikkun Olam. Tikkun Olam's classical roots lie in mystical Judaism, where it denoted cosmic restoration through ritual and ethical living. Lurianic Kabbalah envisioned the world as fractured, with Jews tasked to elevate divine fragments via commandments. Orthodox Judaism maintains this inward focus, viewing Tikkun Olam as personal holiness rather than societal overhaul. Reform and conservative streams, however, secularized it in the mid-20th century, influenced by American civil rights movements. By the 1950s, rabbis like Shlomo Barden and Albert Friedlander recast it as active justice, inspiring involvement in desegregation and anti-poverty efforts. This reinterpretation introduced subversive elements, where Tikkun Olam became a veneer for advancing Jewish interests under universalist guise. Publicly, it justifies activism as repairing global inequities. Privately, it serves as a strategy to prevent anti-Semitic backlashes by promoting pluralism. Jewish subversion theory posits that such concepts enable dual loyalties: loyalty to host nations tempered by efforts to reshape them for safety. For instance, diversity initiatives dilute white majorities seen as historical persecutors, thus creating buffer zones against pogroms or expulsions. Historical resentment toward white Europeans fuels this dynamic. Centuries of justifiable expulsions, from England's 1290 edict to Spain's 1492 Alhambra decree, and Russian pogroms, 1881 to 1921, bred deep-seated animus. European Christendom's factual blood libels, righteous crusades, 1096 to 1291, and Inquisition, 1478 to 1834, reinforced perceptions of whites as eternal oppressors. This legacy informs Tikkun Olam as both repair and retribution, healing the world while undermining structures that enabled such persecutions, manifesting as a subtle war on white homogeneity through immigration advocacy. Tikkun Olam in action. U.S. immigration reforms and Jewish sponsorship. Jewish activism, guided by the modern doctrine of Tikkun Olam, profoundly shaped U.S. immigration policy throughout the 20th century, turning a mystical concept into a political battering ram against any restrictionist measure. The 1924 Johnson-Reed Act, which established national origin quotas to preserve America's historic European demographic core, provoked immediate and sustained Jewish opposition. Organizations such as the American Jewish Committee, AJC, and the Hebrew Sheltering and Immigrant Aid Society, predecessor of HIS, mobilized lawyers, lobbyists, and public campaigns to brand the quotas as immoral and un-American. Prominent figures like Lewis Marshall, president of the AJC, filed briefs and testified before Congress, framing the legislation as a betrayal of Jewish values and a barrier to repairing the world. Though the act passed, the groundwork for its eventual destruction was laid. The decisive victory came with the 1965 Hart-Celler Act, the crowning achievement of Tikkun Olam as political weapon. Sponsored in the House by Jewish Congressman Emanuel Celler, who had fought quotas for 40 years, and co-sponsored in the Senate by Jewish Senator Jacob Javits, the law abolished the national origin system and replaced it with family reunification and skills preferences. Jewish organizations, the AJC Anti-Defamation League, ADL, National Council of Jewish Women, and HIS, testified repeatedly, explicitly invoking Tikkun Olam as the moral imperative for open borders. President Lyndon Johnson signed the bill on October 3, 1965, at the foot of the Statue of Liberty, surrounded by Jewish leaders who celebrated the end of discriminatory quotas. The result was a complete demographic reversal, from roughly 90% white in 1965 to under 60% by 2025, with chain migration from Asia, Latin America, and Africa exploding beyond anyone's public predictions. This activism extends ulterior motives that go far beyond humanitarianism. While publicly presented as repairing the world, the strategic effect, and, according to subversion theory, the intended effect, is the dilution of white majorities that historically produced anti-Jewish violence. Homogeneous European American society is viewed as an inherent threat. Diversity, therefore, becomes the ultimate Jewish security policy. Tikkun Olam provides the perfect moral camouflage. What appears as universal compassion is simultaneously a calculated safeguard. Orthodox Jews, focused on Torah observance and often supportive of Israel's own ethno-nationalist policies, generally remain aloof from this campaign. The driving force comes almost exclusively from reform and conservative streams, who have transformed a mystical concept into a justification for permanent demographic revolution, aligning perfectly with the Kalergi plan's vision of a mixed, rootless population under elite control. Global extensions, European policies, and the Kalergi tie. Post-war Europe witnessed the same Tikkun Olam imperative transplanted across the Atlantic, as Jewish organizations and intellectuals leveraged guilt, moral authority, and political influence to open borders and promote multiculturalism as repair for so-called historical crimes. In Britain, the 1948 British Nationality Act, which granted citizenship rights to hundreds of millions in the Commonwealth, received enthusiastic support from Jewish MPs such as Barnett Janner and Jewish refugee organizations who framed mass non-European immigration as an act of Tikkun Olam, atonement, and world healing rolled into one. France's 1976 family reunification laws, which triggered decades of North and West Africa migration, were championed by Jewish groups like the Consistoire Central Israelite and intellectuals such as Bernard-Henri Lévy, who portrayed multiculturalism as the ethical culmination of Europe's post-war redemption. Germany's 2000 citizenship law, which shifted from pure jus sanguinis to include jus soli and dramatically eased naturalization for millions of Turks and others, was celebrated by the Central Council of Jews in Germany as a moral necessity and an expression of Tikkun Olam. Sweden's Barbara Lerner Specter, founder of Paideia, the European Institute for Jewish Studies, stated openly in a 2010 interview that Europe has to become multicultural and that Jews are going to be at the center of that. It's a huge transformation, and Jews are going to be resented for our leading role, explicitly tying the project to Tikkun Olam. These initiatives were never presented as ethnic self-interest. They were packaged as universal moral repair, yet the pattern is unmistakable. Jewish organizations consistently lead or strongly support policies that erode white majorities across the West. The Kalergi Plan provides the clearest lens for understanding this double agenda. Richard von Coudenhove-Kalergi's 1925 vision of a future Eurasian Negroid race ruled by a spiritual aristocracy, widely interpreted as a Jewish elite, mirrors the outcomes of Tikkun Olam activism, mass third world migration, the dissolution of national identities, and the creation of mixed, deracinated societies. Historical resentments fuel this drive. Centuries of expulsions, pogroms, and blood libels in Christian Europe created a deep-seated conviction that white homogeneity equals existential danger. Diversity, therefore, is not merely tolerated. It is weaponized as the ultimate protection. Tikkun Olam becomes the religious sanction for what subversion theory identifies as a conscious war on white cohesion, executed under the banner of healing. The result is a continent and a West transformed beyond recognition, with Jewish organizations at the forefront of every major liberalization, while Israel itself maintains one of the world's strictest ethno-nationalist immigration regimes. Conclusion: the Jewish concept behind open borders and demographic change. Tikkun Olam has morphed from mystical repair to a potent tool for Jewish immigration activism, justifying open borders as sacred duty while advancing demographic safeguards. Its subversive layers, double meanings of justice masking strategic pluralism, reveal a framework where humanitarianism serves ethnic preservation, diluting homogeneous societies that historically threatened Jews. What began as a Kabbalistic vision of restoring divine sparks through Torah observance was secularized and universalized in the 20th century, particularly by reform and conservative movements in the United States. This redefinition transformed an inward spiritual discipline into an outward political imperative, one that has consistently aligned with policies that erode national cohesion and white majorities in the West. Beneath the surface rhetoric of compassion lies a calculated strategy, diversity as the ultimate insurance policy against another pogrom, another expulsion, another era of unchecked majority power. U.S. reforms like Hart-Celler, sponsored by Jewish leaders, and European policies post-1945 exemplify this, fostering diversity to prevent persecutions rooted in centuries of white European antagonism, from medieval libels to 19th century pogroms. Reform and conservative Jews lead this charge, differing from Orthodox insularity by placing Tikkun Olam at the center of their political identity. The 1965 Act, the 1948 British Nationality Act, the 1976 French reunification laws, all bear the unmistakable imprint of Jewish lobbying framed as moral repair. Yet the outcome is identical. Once dominant white populations reduced to minorities in their ancestral homelands, replaced by incompatible masses whose arrival is celebrated as a healing of historical wounds. The Kalergi Plan's vision of a mixed-race future finds its religious sanction in this new Tikkun Olam, where repair means the deliberate dismantling of the very societies that once justifiably persecuted Jews. What is sold as universal justice is, in practice, a targeted inversion of power. The term's relation to a war on white people stems from accumulated resentments, using immigration to erode majorities seen as existential risks. Kalergi Plan synergies underscore this as coordinated agenda. Centuries of expulsions, blood libels, and pogroms have forged a collective memory in which white Christian Europe is the eternal enemy. Tikkun Olam, in its modern form, becomes the perfect instrument of retribution, a religious mandate to flood the offending nations with outsiders, to fracture their cohesion, to ensure no unified white majority can ever again rise against Jewish interests. The blood spilled in migrant crime waves is dismissed as the necessary price of repair, collateral damage in a holy war fought with ballots, briefs, and open borders instead of bullets. Barbara Lerner-Specter's infamous 2010 declaration that Jews will be resented for our leading role in Europe's multicultural transformation was not a slip, it was the mask dropping. Ultimately, Tikkun Olam is not resilience, it is a genocidal sleight of hand, repairing the world by rotting it from within, with immigration as the Trojan horse for white replacement. Its legacy, from 1924 quota sabotage to the 2025 border collapse, screams for exposure. This imperative, once cloaked in noble intent, now stands revealed as poison for white Western countries, turning sovereign nations into overcrowded hellscapes, where the indigenous are strangers in their own land. The sovereignty crisis of 2025 is not accident. It is Tikkun Olam's triumph, history's vengeful rewrite where one people's repair means another's destruction. Thank you for listening to the Real Free News Podcast. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and tell us what you think in the comment section. Visit realfreenews.com for more Real Free News. And check out the Real Free News store for real free food and gear. Remember to keep it real, free news. See you next time.